Thank you all so much for coming to this Buckley program event that we're so happy to hold, but also quite heartbroken to be doing so. My name's Harry Graver, for so many new faces here. I'm the president of the Buckley program. The Buckley program was started by Lauren Noble, who's present today, about 2.5 years ago or so, just as kind of a speaker series, loosely defined idea. We're kind of rolling stuff around and looking for someone on the faculty to give us some perspective. So this event is particularly special for us because Professor Kagan, as he was to so many people here, was the Buckley program, a huge inspiration. He was kind of with there every step of the way with his guidance and kindness and sense of purpose. And that is kind of, I guess, what's bringing everyone here today. There's no greater testament to that than people here from his first seminar to his last, to all in between. It's really quite impossible to summarize Professor Kagan's contribution to Yale, which is beneficial to me in that I get to outsource that task to Professor Hill, who has been so kind to do that. Perhaps for someone to attempt the impossible, this is appropriate for Professor Hill, whose biography was titled "The Man Upon Whom Nothing Was Lost," a title that will certainly be put to the test in a few seconds. Professor Hill has garnered, though, quite this deserving reputation from his service in the State Department to that at Yale Directed Studies program, as well as the Grand Strategy program. And along with Professor Kagan, most importantly, he really has taken up the mantle of what a true liberal arts education is meant to be here, which we'll be hearing about this afternoon. So without any further ado, Professor Hill.
Don't be alarmed, I'm not a professor. I'm a friend of Don Kagan, and I was the second choice to make this introduction. My wife, Norma Thompson, was the first one asked to introduce Professor Donald Kagan. She could not do so and is dismayed at being unable to take this opportunity. She's at this moment delivering a paper at a conference in Canada. She devoutly wishes that she were here instead to pay tribute to her hero, Don Kagan. In the electric anticipation of this hall, which is palpable, we can all sense that this afternoon is an event in Yale's history, in intellectual history, and in American history. Emerson said that an institution is the lengthened shadow of a man. Yale, the discipline of history, and the nation have all felt the impact of Don Kagan, and each of these institutions will come to recognize that impact in the years ahead even more than they do now. The United States of America has honored Don Kagan with the highest awards the federal government can confer on intellectual achievement in the humanities. Don Kagan has conferred upon the government his profound thinking on war and peace. And Don and Myrna Kagan have conferred upon the nation their own highest gifts, their remarkable sons, Fred and Bob, with their wives, Kimberly, the military strategist, and Victoria, the prominent diplomat. The annals of historical scholarship have been ennobled by what a leading foreign critic, no friend of America, called the foremost work of history produced in North America in the 20th century. That ain't even close. Kagan is the only historian of the modern era worthy of mention in the same breath with Herodotus. Thucydides, of course, he surpassed. Tacitus. Tacitus or Gibbon. Edward Gibbon famously wrote that it was at Rome on the 15th of October, 1764, as I sat musing amidst the ruins of the Capitol, while the barefooted friars were singing vespers in the temple of Jupiter, that the idea of writing the decline and fall of the city first started to my mind. What would we not give to get Don Kagan's recollections of how and when and where the idea of writing the Peloponnesian War first started to his mind? The world awaits his autobiography. And for Yale, what has Kagan not done? Chairman of Classics, Dean of Yale College, Master of Timothy Dwight, Athletic Director, Sterling Professor. When you enter Payne Whitney Gymnasium and are confronted by that sculpture of the bulldog, you are seeing Don Kagan. When you walk through Woolsey Rotunda, that Athenian warrior sculpted into the wall is Kagan. When you look across Old Campus and see Nathan Hale, hands bound behind his back, defying the enemies of freedom, that's Don Kagan. As was said of another American patriot long ago, Don Kagan has been unawed by opinion, unseduced by flattery, undismayed by disaster, and always an inspiring exemplar of antique courage. And then there's Don the Kid, telling us stories of which seemed into our minds to enable us to envision him playing stickball on the evening streets of Brownsville, Brooklyn. It was, he said, a kind of polis, a poor, tough, wonderful place to grow up. The kid who would grow up to authoritatively explain to you the infield fly rule, or analyze whether Ted Williams was a clutch hitter, and in doing so, explain why the study of history is superior to political science. The kid who would grow up to be, as Paul Kennedy said, a combination of Winston Churchill and John Wayne. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Professor Donald Kagan.
Thank you so much, Charlie. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your very warm greeting. My subject is liberal education. And today, more than ever, the term requires definition, especially as to the questions, what is a liberal education and what is it for? From Cicero, his artes liberales, as he called them, to the attempt at common curricula in more recent times, to the chaotic cafeteria that passes for a curriculum in most American universities and colleges today. The concept has suffered from vagueness, confusion, and contradiction. From the beginning, the champions of a liberal education have thought of it as seeking at least 4 kinds of goal. One was as an end in itself, or at least as a way of achieving that contemplative life that Aristotle thought was the greatest happiness. Knowledge and the acts of acquiring and considering it were the ends of this education, and they were good in themselves. A second was as a means of shaping the character, the style, the taste of a person, to make him good himself and better able to fit in well with and to take his place in the society of others like him. A third was to prepare him for a useful career in the world, one that was appropriate to his status as a free man. For Cicero and Quintilian among the Romans, this meant a career as an orator that would allow a man to protect the private interests of himself and his friends in the law courts, and to advance the public interest in the assemblies, and in the Senate, and in the magistracies. And finally, the fourth way, or the fourth goal, was to contribute to the individual citizen's freedom in ancient society. Servants, they thought, were ignorant and parochial. So freemen must be learned and cosmopolitan. Servants were ruled by others, so freemen must take part in their own government. Servants specialized to become competent at some specific and limited task, so freemen must know something of everything and understand general principles without yielding to the narrowness of expertise. The Romans' recommended course of study was literature, history, philosophy, and rhetoric. Now, it was once common to think of the medieval university as very different, as a place that focused on learning for its own sake. But in fact, the medieval universities, whatever their commitment to learning for its own sake, were institutions that trained their students for professional careers. Graduates in the liberal arts were awarded a certificate that was a license to teach others what they had learned and to make a living in that way. For some, the study of liberal arts was really preliminary to professional study in medicine, in theology, and law as part of the road to important positions in church and state. Now, the 7 liberal arts of the Middle Ages consisted of two kinds of groups. One was the trivium, consisting of grammar, rhetoric, and logic, and the other was the quadrivium, which consisted of arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and music. The discovery and absorption of Aristotle's works in medieval Europe in the 12th century quickly led to the triumph of logic and dialectic over the other arts. They were the glamour subjects of the time, believed to be the best means for training and disciplining the mind and to provide the best tools for successful careers in both church and in state. The dominant view of knowledge and truth was that they were both already in place. They needed only to be learned, organized, and harmonized. There was nothing still to be discovered. Knowledge and truth had only to be systematized and explained. An ambitious scholar could hope to achieve some semblance of universal knowledge. And this was good in itself. For to the medieval man, God was the source of all truth, and to comprehend it was to come closer to divinity. They also placed great value on the practical rewards of their liberal education, and rightly so. For their logical, dialectical, mathematical, and rhetorical studies were the best available training for the clerks, notaries, lawyers, canons, and managers who was so badly needed to keep the Middle Ages going. But that was not quite enough for the humanists of the Renaissance, who made a conscious effort to return to the ideas and values of the classical age. As Christians, they continued to study the church fathers, but they rejected the commentaries of the medieval schoolmen and went directly to the sources themselves, applying the powerful new tactic of philologic analysis. Their greatest innovation and delight, however, was the study of classical texts written by the pagan authors whose focus on the secular world and the elevation of the importance of mankind powerfully appealed to them.